Nothing on this show is authorized by the Food and Drug Administration, and nothing said here is intended to treat, cure, prevent, or diagnose any disease. Contact your physician before starting a diet or exercise regimen, including supplementation. This is not medical advice and is for entertainment purposes only.
Do we have 15 seconds before he gets mad at us?
I don't know.
All right. Joining us today on the Supp Works podcast, I'm proud to announce that we have Dr. Rick Kreider, PhD, Director of the Exercise and Sport Nutrition Laboratory at Texas A&M University. He is a veteran of the International Society of Sports Nutrition for many decades now. He is probably one of the foremost researchers on this planet to study one of the most amazing molecules that exists in sports nutrition, and that is creatine. Dr. Kreider, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we brought Dr. Kreider on because there are some interesting things going on legislation-wise in the United States. We currently have a law, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994, which is like the nationwide law of the land that governs and regulates dietary supplements. However, recently, there are a couple of states that have decided to try to start restricting access to dietary supplements that have claims of muscle growth and weight loss. And, I'm sure as many of you know that I'm involved in several different trade organizations that would be on the opposing end of those laws. And these have been proposed now in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York, California, Colorado, Illinois, now also in Washington and in Texas, and I wore my "Don't Mess with Texas" T-shirt in light of this whole podcast. So yeah, I've certainly been involved in a lot of grassroots efforts in Texas as far as fighting this legislation. But like the whole point of this is we've got a whole bunch of states going rogue. There's a special interest group called Striped out of Harvard University. We don't know what we did to make them mad, but they're on this warpath of trying to introduce these bills, sometimes multiple times. Even if one of these bills gets defeated, they'll just reintroduce it during the next session to try to restrict access to all these different dietary supplements for weight loss and muscle growth under the premise that they are the cause of eating disorders, which is odd. And they've even changed that and walked it back a little bit. And this is not just eating disorders, but it's also the potential use of using steroids and a performance enhancing drug. So if I can just get your temperature check on your gut feeling about how you feel about all these different state bills that are being introduced that are kind of flying in the face of our national law and then attacking things that are like creatine.
My initial reaction is it's nonsense.
Yeah.
And it's an example of political overreach. Everybody talks about basing decisions on science. And here you have a situation where you have lots of science showing all benefit, all safety for all ages. And they want to go after creatine or muscle building that actually works and can prevent kids from taking steroids and things because it gives them an option.
And it's one of their legal alternatives.
Right. And so my thought is it's just misguided, uneducated, and inappropriate political action. And it's usually by people who are pushing certain agendas. And so the creatine researchers, other researchers like myself, got tired of seeing this. And so we put out a statement. Well, here's the science, folks. Here are the facts.
Now, this letter is signed by how many different people that are authorities in creatine research?
About 40.
Yeah. 40 different researchers.
And it could have been many, many more. We just wanted to get it out soon.
Yeah. And
so let's talk about this letter for a second.
Yeah,
because this is about to be, it is published?
It was just accepted for publication today in the Frontiers of Nutrition. And it is available out because we did a press release, so it's out. But the actual paper has been accepted today.
Cool.
Eduardo, if we can put that link in the video, that'd be great.
Yeah. So essentially, y'all got together and put out this letter, and we read over it, and essentially it outlines, the what, the why, the who, the how. But you outlined that there are over 680 human clinical trials?
At least.
And this is of all ages?
Yeah, from infants all the way to very older individuals.
And what are some of the findings in these studies as far as like the overall benefits and if there's any health risks or safety concerns?
Well, the vast majority show beneficial effects on things like increasing muscle, increasing strength, increasing power. That's what creatine started to be as a sports supplement, but because creatine's involved in every cell, especially when there's challenges to the cells, we now have looked at how creatine can affect all type of health issues. And so from infants and pregnancy all the way to very older individuals, studies have been done to look at how creatine may be able to help manage disease or reduce risk of disease. And so you look at all the data, it's overwhelmingly positive in all type of aspects, and all the studies show safety. There's not any study showing adverse effects. In fact, we just got done getting back from Germany on the Creatine for Health conference for 2025, presented a safety study to try to put this nail in the coffin here. And we looked at those 685 studies, and we looked at how many people were taking placebo, about 13,000, how many people were taking creatine, almost 13,000, and did statistical analyses, any greater prevalence of anything that's been reported in the literature, and it came out with zilch, nothing. And there's lots of benefits. And so the overall impact is it's safe, it's effective for all ages, and politicians should stay in their lane and base their policy on actual research and talking to experts rather than allowing political action groups to influence them.
And it's hard because, you know, we're stuck in this situation right now where it's this cry out to save the children is usually the type of approach that they're going to take with this kind of thing. And I think you'll be hard pressed to like find any kids overdosing on creatine.
Well, it goes over that, it goes beyond that. If they want to help the kids, they should be promoting creatine. What do I mean?
Why so?
There are NHANES database studies, which are these massive studies that have monitored health status, actually out of Boston, and people for decades. And these databases monitor every health aspect, look at nutrition, diet, and different interventions and prevalence of different problems. So researchers out of Dr. Osijic's lab went back and started looking at the NHANES database. Kids who have low creatine in their diet, less than 1 gram a day, don't grow as fast, have higher body fat, have less muscle mass. Young girls who are beginning menstruation have more menstrual cycle abnormalities or issues if they have a low creatine in their diet. Kids up through adolescence are having lower creatine in their diet. And so the worst thing you can do right now is tell them, oh, you can stand in line for a high quality or a high priced latte that's got lots of calories.
A lot of sugar.
No problem with that. But oh my goodness, if you want to buy a supplement that has protein in it or creatine, that's the opposite thing we should be telling kids.
I mean, the laws that are out right now, some of them even propose that these things are put in lock boxes.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to put a protein powder behind and make them go see a pharmacist or bring their parents?
I mean, we're not cigarettes. and you can't use creatine or protein to make meth, and I don't really see the point in putting it under lock and key.
And you don't take creatine or protein or muscle-building supplements to lose weight. You basically take it to build muscle. And so the kids I'm worried about are the 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old who's trying to make their high school team and needs a little strength, and we're telling them not to do things that can get them stronger, that can then therefore reduce injuries, help them stay away from things that would potentially be much more dangerous. And so it's an example where politicians and political action groups have gone too far. And their data and safety on kids. I mean, a lot of the studies on long-term effects are in kids. There are kids that are born without creatine, ability to produce creatine. They have some deficiencies in creatine synthesis. And these kids are given high-dose creatine for the lifespan. And we have studies over 30 years that have been giving kids creatine at doses that are 3 or 4 times the relative amount we give for loading in adults. And it's all been shown to be safe. So
was that a 30 gram a day dose that you were saying?
Yeah, they were taking more like, we typically say load with 0.3 grams.
Yeah.
So for an adult, that's about 20, 25. They take 0.8. So they're taking equivalent to about 75 grams a day for their body size throughout their lifespan.
So the myths and the wives' tales about like, it's bad for your kidneys and stuff like that, we would have figured that out in those studies easily.
Oh, absolutely. So all these studies, a lot of them have looked at renal function, and all those studies show less effect. In fact, one of the NHANES analysis shows less damage on renal when you have a higher diet in creatine. So it's like a lot of the anecdotal side effects reported that have been coming up in the internet. Almost all the studies show completely opposite. Like, oh, it causes cramping. No, all the studies actually shows it lessens the degree of cramping because it increases hydration and allows you to manage the fluid better. I mean, so you look at all these things, and this is an example. Somebody thought that any supplements are bad, so therefore let's ban good things away from kids. And the parents should be giving and making sure that their children have enough creatine in their diet to have a normal growth. They're now using creatine in third trimester pregnancy and during breastfeeding and talking about adding creatine to formulas. Why? Kids that are born that have difficulty during the natural childbirth and may have some lack of oxygen due to asphyxia, like the blue baby cord goes around the neck or something, they have a very high probability of not surviving. But when you give animals creatine in their diet and they cause that asphyxia to occur, their survival rate's like 50% higher. And so they're now in Australia doing studies where they're looking at creatine changes over time as premature kids all the way through the first 3 or 4 years, and they show that they actually perform better and have much better cognitive function. And this also came out of the kids' studies that they weren't producing enough creatine. They tend to have very poor motor and brain function development. They give them lots of creatine, and it more normalizes their function. So we think that creatine is going to be the next folate.
Okay, that's kind of where my head was at. I was like, what are the criteria that really need to be hit in order for creatine to truly be considered as like an essential nutrient or even like a quasi-vitamin in this case?
There's a lot of data that we have to have.
Yeah.
And we were actually talking about this. What's it going to take the next step to get it to be a conditionally essential nutrient?
Yeah.
And so there's a number of hurdles that have to be done. We have a lot of the data already. So it's packaging it properly and doing a few more studies specific to finding exactly how much creatine's in different foods. We have a handful of foods we know it's high content in. We need to broaden that a little bit better and to look at exactly how much is in the normal diet to get a better range of, we think it's 2 grams a day is the need, but it actually may be more than that based on knowing more foods that have creatine, things like that have to be done.
And does part of it have to do like with its role inside the body? And I say this because like, I don't know if a lot of you people know at home, like it's more than just creating muscle and improving hydration, but it like has a specific role in the cell that and also inside the mitochondria, because there's two of the different creatines. Creatine kinase enzymes. So there's one that's mitochondrial specific, and then there's one that's just cytosolic. And your body takes in creatine via the transporters, and then once you're at the cell, that's where creatine becomes creatine phosphate, and there's this equilibrium that goes back and forth with being phosphocreatine, being regular creatine, and then creatine kinase generating and destroying at the same time that molecule. And creatine pretty much determines how quickly and how efficiently your cells are able to make ATP. And because the mitochondrial role specifically is there, and that's such like a central crux of all metabolism. So all fat and all glucose, it like all goes through mitochondrial respiration.
What's up, everyone? TK here with Nutramedia, and today I want to talk about the sponsor, which is us, Nutramedia. As you know, Supp Works is filmed here at our Nutramedia studios in Willis, Texas, and we are a full turnkey design studio. Really what that means is we help brands create their identity systems, their logo, their fonts, their colors, their textures, their patterns, and then apply that to the greater spectrum of their brand. So like their packaging labels, whether it's bags, boxes, whatever your packaging is, we help design that. We design it for print, and then we take those assets and those ideologies and then build it out so it's scalable for your marketing. That means your merchandising, your promotional needs, your booths, things like that. We're a full turnkey graphic design studio. We have 7 in-house designers, including myself, and we also can do some auxiliary media like editing videos and helping with websites, helping do things like podcasts. So anything in the world of CPG, supplements, packaging design, media, we are your go-to agency for that. You can always contact me directly, tk@nutramedia.co. You can also contact Blair. She helps with our sales, blair@nutramedia.co. And if you're looking to get started on a project, just know that we're very flexible with pricing. We have an hourly buy-in in which we ask people to sort of buy into a retainer. And then once that retainer is met, we're just hourly after that on a month-to-month basis. We're very flexible with most brands. Don't come to me with like a one-off thing. We like to work on larger projects that have continuation over a course of time. We have some clients that we've been working with for well over 3 years, and they ask us to do things for them every single day. And that's really where our bread and butter is being an attachment to your marketing to help you create assets that are high quality at rapid speed so that you can scale your business. That's what Nutramedia is. So if you guys are interested, go to nutramedia.co, no M, nutramedia.co. You can fill out a form, or you can email us directly. You can also just DM us, or you can also find us on LinkedIn.
Yeah, so it's not only just the energy forming phosphocreatine. Creatine actually goes in and out of the mitochondria to the side as all this transfer phosphates, intermediates in and out. It helps translocate or move the ATP from the mitochondria to where it needs to be done. And it's not only that there's cytosolic and mitochondrial creatine kinases, there's tissue-specific creatine kinases in the heart and the brain and other tissues that we're now finding that there's so many metabolic roles specific to creatine and the unique aspects of that creatine kinase enzyme that's what's the basis for all the medical applications. So a lot of the clinical conditions, you can't produce enough energy.
Yeah.
And when you can normalize function. And so, for example, even in cancer, there's studies out of UCLA, Dr. Yang, showing that tumor growth, you can retard some tumor growth based on the availability of creatine. And so they're actually doing studies in animals to try and showing amazing results on blocking or slowing down tumor growth when they inject cancer to these animals. And so just one area that we're expanding on our research, but the point is metabolic activity is essential, and maintaining availability of cellular energy is critical. And that's where creatine plays all the roles in the body, and that's why there's so many potential health benefits.
Well, and that's also what I found kind of interesting, because you were talking about how adolescents who are deficient in creatine have less muscle mass and more fat mass. And knowing that the heart, the muscles, the liver, and even I guess you could say brain tissue too, have a lot of busy mitochondria, and fat cells don't. So it could just be a matter of these busy, heavy mitochondriated cells are going to be the ones that need creatine the most. And if you're not going to feed them, you're going to feed the cells that aren't as metabolically active.
Yeah, but there's actually some interesting data on fat and brown adipose tissue now with creatine.
Oh, really? I'm curious. I was wondering this in the car earlier, and I'm like, what the hell does a fat cell do with creatine?
Yeah. So, the brown adipose tissues are more metabolically active.
They have more mitochondria.
Right. And so there's actually, it's beginning, but there's some studies out of, I believe, Switzerland, Dr. Uwe Schlottner. It's really cool stuff on affecting brown adipose tissue. So there's actually some studies that creatine can promote fat loss. It looks like it's probably more so in women.
Yeah.
But more needs to be done. Usually you gain muscle and your body fat doesn't change. There's a couple studies showing it lowered. But it may be there's some activity in the brown adipose tissue, which is the more metabolically active. And it may be mitochondrial enhancement, energy availability, more energy. And they call this a futile energy system.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is like the old UCP1 coupler type proteins that some nutrients and medications were trying to stir up to burn extra calories, like a thermogenic effect. So that needs to be elucidated, but that's another area where creatine may have a role because of the metabolic activity.
That's interesting because I always think, for those of you at home, I'm going to use another metaphor. Your body's like the earth, and now it's like got a core, mantle, and crust. And the core is like your organs. The mantle would be like your brown adipose tissue and probably your muscle tissue. And then, like, if you were saying like the outer part of the crust would be the skin, but then your white adipose tissue, your white fat cells, the oldest ones, are right up there next to the crust, and they're the oldest. They're the ones that got there first because you're just layering this kind of stuff on, and your muscles have a lot of mitochondria, so they're very hot. So there's a thermogenic gradient that goes on here. But even though the white adipose tissue is like super insulating, and in order to get these cells to burn more efficiently, these white adipose tissue will undergo a beiging, and they'll become brown, and they'll get more mitochondria, and they'll become more metabolically active as they reach closer to that interface where the muscle tissue is. And it makes sense because as these white adipocytes, become more energetic, it could have a single mitochondria that just has more energy. And in that beiging process, you suddenly get more mitochondria. This is going to suddenly make these cells a lot more relevant to the amount of creatine that's going on and make them more metabolically active to where you can make them to where you can burn that extra fat storage.
So that's the thought, and there's at least a few studies showing a little bit more fat loss over time, and it may be the reason that kids have lower body fat when they have a higher creatine in the diet.
Yeah.
So, but that needs to be studied, but that is something, another area of creatine interest, yeah.
I do think it's really fascinating, especially in infants with like brain development.
So your brain also contains a lot of phosphocreatine, and when you're metabolically active in thinking, you actually have more energy demand, and this extra phosphocreatine is very important for just cognition. And we know that kids that don't have much creatine synthesis deficiency have very low creatine content in the brain. And so what they try to do with that high dose over time is increase that brain creatine. So that got people to think, well, if it's involved in those kids, is there an effect of can we increase brain creatine content and therefore increase cognition? Maybe it's a nootropic, basically. And so there's probably been...
It's one of the hot new subjects going on right now, that creatine's for more than muscle.
Yes, and there's probably 15 or 20 studies show that if you give creatine, particularly in older folks, that they are able to do cognitive function tasks better. There's an NHANES study to show that if you have a higher creatine in your diet as you age, and you're giving older people a cognitive challenge, the people that have a higher creatine in their diet do better on that cognitive challenge, maybe a delaying of the mild cognitive impairment that we get as we get older. And we actually are doing studies now looking at it as a nootropic approach. We want to increase energy, phosphocreatine, and then we're thinking about other nootropics that could be added to that to not only help physical adaptations, but also mental. And it may be even more important as we age and get closer to that mild cognitive impairment point.
Now, is creatine, is it able to cross the blood-brain barrier on its own, or is that something that's more exclusive to GAA, the precursor?
Well, it can.
Yeah.
It just takes a larger dose over a longer period of time. So here's a change. We used to think, all you need to do is load the muscle and take 5 grams or so, 3 to 5 grams a day for just general maintenance. That's for the muscle. Our studies in brain are more like 10 grams a day.
Well, wasn't there like a sleep deprivation study that was done recently at like a dose like that?
Yeah, so there have been studies where if you're sleep deprived and you provide creatine, you're able to think more clearly after the deprivation.
So that's even like acute cognitive impairment.
Yeah, and there's actually a study, now I don't know if I buy it all yet, but there's one study that was just presented and published that one dose of 30 grams increased cognitive function. Not only cognitive function, increased phosphocreatine in the brain acutely. And so that would then
That's a lot of powder.
Yeah, that's the only issue. So we think the better option is guanidine acetic acid, which is GAA. That's the precursor to creatine. That crosses the blood-borne barrier easier than creatine monohydrate and increases phosphocreatine to the same or more than creatine monohydrate with a much lower dose. So 2 grams, which is equal to about 15 or 20. And so we're actually doing a study, 10 grams a day of creatine, and then we're going to add a gram of GAA with it and see if there's...
Have you experienced GAA personally?
Yes.
You feel it?
Pretty much.
Like acutely?
Yeah, within an hour or so, you're thinking more focused.
I mean, it had been a while since I had tried it. I had a new product over 10 years ago, and I thought nothing of it. I was just like, oh, it's whatever. It's the formula. And then I just tried it alone in isolation. I did a gram cap of it, and I was blown away. I was like, this is like an oldie but a goodie right here. Because there are times where it had been in the market, like in the probably the late 2000s or something like that. And, I just thought this is creatine because there's no big deal. But now, like after having like revisited it, GAA will thwack you.
I think there's something there. And what we've done is 5 grams of creatine monohydrate, 1 gram.
Yeah.
Twice a day. And 1 gram GA twice a day. And if you take creatine alone, you'll get lots of benefits, but that GA, I think, is better for the brain. And so it may be that we're going to have tissue-specific creatine needs for muscle, maybe GA plus creatine for the brain, and then you're really optimizing the phosphocreatine stores in the body. And we know that if you increase phosphocreatine, you're going to have better cognitive function.
Yeah.
Because you can handle the challenges of the energy demands acutely. Because when you're thinking, you're not always having greater blood flow.
No.
You got to have the energy available to do it. So this may be one of several ways to improve cognitive function as you age. And so we're doing actually a study that's being funded by WoodNext, which is a foundation started by the folks who started Roku.
Okay.
And they're funding us multi-year trials to look at how we can improve physical and cognitive function in middle-aged to older folks. And so our first study is creatine, and we're doing a study on GAA. We're combining creatine with GAA, and we're going to start adding some other nootropics on top of that, like acetylcholine and other things, to try to have kind of this aging of benefit.
Yeah.
As you're getting older, you need to keep muscle mass. As you get older, you need to keep muscle performance and strength. So you get creatine for that. And then if GA has a little bit more advantage in the brain, then you're going to have the cognitive benefit. And then if you provide antioxidants, fish oils, those type of basic things for the brain health, then you might be able to delay that mild cognitive impairment and maintain function better as you age. So sport nutrition is not just sports, it's active nutrition throughout the lifespan.
Well, and I think that it's really easy to like try to demonize the sports nutrition industry, but at the same time, like we are pretty much like we're on the cutting edge of finding out all the things that have like just completely gotten forgotten about or swept under the rug from the pharmaceutical industry. Like we are left to preen through all the plants and all the animals and all the stuff that's like in our diet to look for things that make sense, that fill these holes in our knowledge that we don't necessarily know were there. I think 20 years ago we weren't thinking of creatine in the sense of being like an essential nutrient like we are now.
No, it was a sports performance supplement. We did some of the first studies, and our thought was if it makes you build more muscle and helps you in performance, then great, we got an ergogenic aid.
Yeah.
And then as those studies came through and we started looking at more areas and looking at, well, what about diabetics? What about other groups that could potentially benefit from creatine? Now you have this amazing literature on the health benefits of creatine. That if you go to creatineforhealth.com, you can find all these studies and lots of YouTube videos of the experts talking about this stuff. And it's absolutely amazing. I'll give you an example. In 2010, we're in Cambridge, UK. At one of the creatine conferences. And Roger Harris, who was the first one to do the creatine studies and looked at how it affected muscle concentration, at least in the modern era, we're hearing all this stuff about cancer. And he leans over to me, and I think we are two of the people who know the most about what's been published on creatine. He says, Richard, have you heard his studies before on cancer? This is amazing. And so this is what's been happening in the last 10 years. The amount of medical applications and health applications has expanded way beyond anybody thought. And so what had become a sports supplement has now become a health supplement throughout the lifespan, which is pretty phenomenal.
You mentioned Roger Harris. Can you give a little background story on Roger? And
just like the story of creatine, really.
So it's pretty interesting. We just published a paper on how creatine from muscle biopsy days to now has really helped reformat the whole sport nutrition industry and research area. So Roger came out of Eric Hultman's lab. And Eric Hultman worked with a guy named Bergstrom. And in the 60s, they came up with the muscle biopsy. And so that's what they became known on. And up to that time, we didn't know what happens when you have diet on carbohydrate or how protein or amino acids, all these things change. We didn't even know about energy. When you do a sprint, does ATP go down? Does it stay the same? Does phosphocreatine change? All that stuff the biopsy gave. So they were doing studies in the 60s, and they got the idea about creatine in the early 70s because they saw phosphocreatine changes, creatine levels change, all this, and they tried it, and it didn't work. And they had a paper in 75 they were going to publish, and they just decided not even to do anything with it. So lo and behold, they kept on doing studies, and then about late 80s, they wanted to look at it. So, there may be something here if we give the right dosage. And so they tried some things, and they actually asked a company to send some creatine monohydrate, another company, and they mistakenly sent something else. They sent beta-alanine.
That's very different.
Right? And so Roger Harris also was the first one to do beta-alanine, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so they didn't know what to do with it. They said, well, let's do something. So they decided to give it to a horse.
Interesting.
And then they decided to do a biopsy. And up to that, they didn't see any effect. And the horse ate so much of the creatine and measured it proved that it could actually go up. And then they started doing the human trials and found 5 grams is the best dose to increase and all those things. But that never would have happened if they didn't mistakenly send the wrong stuff. And so it was kind of a serendipitous type thing. And then that one study in 92 that came out, several folks in the group started saying, well, does it increase muscle contractions? And they did some isokinetic stuff, Paul Greenoff and a few others. And then we picked it up with Anthony Almada in the United States to do some studies in athletes. So I think we were the first study in athletes. Now, in 92 in the Olympics, they had given some to the athletes there, and Linford Christie, for example, won the 100 meters race, and he was the oldest person ever to win the 100-meter race in the Olympics. And so there had been trying around, and there was one soccer team that hadn't won a championship in decades, and they took creatine, and they all won for the first time. In paper, actually, this last few weeks, we were talking and seeing some of these news releases about this. So the buzz came out around 92, but this first studies that showed actually an increased muscle mass in weightlifted athletes was our study that we did in 94. As soon as we did the study in 94, I get a call from Dave Ellis, who was the sport nutritionist in Nebraska. And he said, hey, I've been talking to folks. We heard that this might do. What do you think of this stuff? I said, well, I can tell you, we gave it for a month, and we had resistance-trained athletes, and 2 weeks in, they're already up in muscle mass. In 4 weeks, it's like 3 kgs of muscle mass. And strength, power, all improved. And he said, man, I think there's something here. And so we then did several studies with the University of Memphis team, but they started everybody on creatine right away, and they won 2 national championships back-to-back. Right? Fascinating. We then go and play Peyton Manning, University of Tennessee. We were a 26-point dog at the University of Memphis. This is one of the biggest, this was listed as one of the biggest upsets of the 21st century, whatever it was, 1996, 98 or something like that. And we upset Peyton Manning, number 6 in the country. They're supposed to win the championship. The next year, that December, they sent all their strength staff to our strength clinic to figure out what in the world we were doing.
Must be something with the training.
Yeah. And so we told them what we were doing, showed them some of the results we had, and they put everybody on creatine. And that next year, they win the national championship, not with Peyton Manning, but with another quarterback. And then I think Nebraska won it again after it. So that led to say, wait a minute, we shouldn't let Nebraska take all this supplements, and they can afford this stuff, and we better ban it because it's unfair advantage to everybody else. Mm-hmm. Now, everybody's on creatine. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting how it kind of worked. But that first study in football players, we were giving our first study was 16 grams a day for a month.
Wow.
Then we did a study up to 25 grams per day. We put it in a carbohydrate and protein powder, kind of like Metrics back in the day.
Yeah.
And one was Phosphagain, and then Phosphagain 2 was with 25 grams a day, and we had amazing results. I still use that strategy when I have athletes I need to put weight on, like a tight end in football that wants to get in the draft as a tackle because they're faster. And we've had several athletes with 40, 50 pounds on, you know, and then they're now top draft pick in the NFL.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and so it works, and that kind of launched the whole thing. So that's kind of the history. And then after that, everybody started doing studies and looking at other. And then really in the 2006 to 10 area, we started doing more medical. In the last, I'd say 5 or 8 years, a lot of people have done a lot of medical. We're still doing sports stuff, but certainly a lot of the health stuff is now.
Yeah, I mean, there's over 600 of them now. I figure it's pretty well proven. They're all taking it. So when like an athlete comes into a university program, do they have a protocol in which they're recommended to take?
Well, we developed the International Society of Sport Nutrition position stand on creatine in 2007, and another one in 2017. I'm one of the co-founders of ISSN. And they then, all the protocols are in there. And so I get calls of how we did it, but you know, it talks about putting with carbohydrate protein, taking it alone. And so the protocols are out there. And so what we do is if we have someone we need to put a lot of weight on, we'll put 3 shakes a day with 5 to 8 grams of creatine per shake. And we do that until they get as big as they need to be, until the coaches say, whoa, you're going too big. And as long as they're speeding up and fast and quick, I don't care. We actually had football players at Memphis that ended up in the NFL that the position coach said, Doc, you got to stop this stuff. They're getting too big.
That's how we like them.
Yeah, I said, well, are they slowing down? Oh, man, they're bigger than they've ever been. We had linebackers at 255. They were running 4.6s. I mean, you know, just amazing, and played in the NFL. And so, you know, they all came in 20, 30 pounds lighter, but after 2 or 3 years of doing this type of thing, we actually did a safety study for 21 months now. Every day they'd got a shake with or without creatine. We monitored whether the people with creatine had more problems than without. And boy, I tell you what, most of the guys on the creatine, a lot of them ended up drafted in NFL and several All-Pros.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
I think what's amazing about this is like, as you talked about like the origins of this in like the 1960s. Or just muscle biopsies even having their origins in the 1960s. And for those of you who don't know, muscle biopsy is like taking a core sample out of your muscle. Good thing they were doing it in horses. But
Yeah, we do it in humans too.
well, we do now.
Yeah.
But just the notion that like it has been less than 100 years since we knew about muscle biopsies or anything like creatine or any elevations in phosphocreatine and these tiny invisible events going on at the cellular level. It was also during the 60s, Watson and Crick, you know, came out with the double helix model of DNA.
But
And,
what's interesting
like,
is
this is some really complex shit that has gone on, and it's been less than 100 years.
the first studies on creatine actually were in 1830.
Okay.
A guy named Chevreul. And then they were mainly noticing that there were changes in these compounds, creatine, creatinine, all this stuff. The first supplement that came out was a meat extract from von Liebig's lab in Germany. And it was basically a high creatine content meat extract. They didn't know it was creatine, but they said it would increase strength and power.
What year was this?
This was like 1860s.
Okay.
A lot of the strong men back then.
Well, this is why nobody's got patents on it, because it's been around that long in the marketplace.
And the first study I found was done where they found that creatine increased muscle weight or size or performance, both in animals and humans, was at a Yale in 1909. So this last few weeks I did a history of the creatine thing, and there's all these studies showing that, you know, these different diseases have different levels of creatine and creatinine excretion and all this stuff. And, you know, it wasn't until the 60s where we really started feeding people a lot of it, but there had been a bunch of studies all the way to, you know, over 100 years
They were
ago.
beating around the bush, but they weren't quite on it.
They didn't have the methodology to know what it was doing. They didn't have magnetic spectroscopy or didn't have the biopsy procedure, but they can measure urine excretion and all these things.
Yeah.
And they knew that if you're diabetic, you had different urine creatine, creatinine excretion, all that thing. There was even studies in infants back in the 1920s. So this has gone way back, and we often think we're doing novel stuff in science, and nobody's ever done it, and then you find out, well, if you dig deep enough, there's been some people thought about this stuff a long time ago.
Yeah. And I think it's funny. One of the things I get as far as like a lot of feedback, especially after last Sports and Active Nutrition Conference is like doing studies on creatine is like beating a dead horse, and like this is like uncovering a dinosaur skeleton. Okay, and we haven't even gotten the whole thing out of the ground yet.
It's like you're seeing just one piece of the limb. You don't know the rest of the structure.
Yeah.
And so the more we dig and find out, the more amazed we are in the creatine research community about what it can do. I can tell you that the meeting we had a few days ago, last week in Germany, everybody there was blown away with some of the new data. And we're the ones that know about most of the data.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The potential is fantastic. And the bottom line is it's safe, it's effective, and everybody ought to have some creatine in their diet, whether it comes from meat or fish or some supplemental form.
So what was the one thing that coming out of the creatine conference that probably blew your mind the most, or at least like made you kind of giddy in your chair there?
Well, there was more stuff on cancer.
Yeah.
I can't really tell you because it was like embargoed until it actually comes out.
Okay, fine.
Phenomenal. Jeff Stout, who's another researcher, did creatine for many years, turns around to me and goes, wow. You know, when you impress a researcher with that, I mean, this is like almost Nobel Prize type stuff, right? And then the other things were with the infants that Stacey Ellery's doing. The potential is phenomenal. And then, you know, even the N. Haynes database that they presented, some of that new stuff, there's a new paper that's just about to come out to talk about mortality.
Yeah.
And
Do you wish
creatine.
after the creatine conference that you could have probably done some edits to the letter that you guys wrote?
Yes.
'Cause there's more juicy stuff that you would have put in there.
Yeah, you know, we did the analysis, but we didn't hear some of the other stuff. Of course, you don't want to put all the newest stuff until it comes out
Right.
and published, but they were presenting some really cool, massive, amazing stuff. And for example, in women's health,
Yeah.
the menstrual cycle changes. It needs more creatine during the menstrual cycle. There could probably be better timing of nutrient intake.
I mean, just the cellular turnover in general would make a lot of sense to have more creatine.
Yeah, so Abby Smith at UNC.
Was she there?
Yeah, Abby Smith.
God,
and I-
she's a killer. She's awesome.
We had every top person there.
She had a great presentation at SANS for women's health, and she's amazing.
Yeah. So they're doing a lot of cool things with creatine around training, menstrual cycle, and it's you know, you look at the data, it's throughout the lifespan. So whether you're young, kid, adolescent, middle age, older folks, there's data showing phenomenal effects simply by having a little bit of creatine in their diet or supplementing smartly.
Well, there's another thing that's brought up in the letter is the economic impact of it. That taking creatine is cheaper than having to eat, you know, a pound of fish or steak or whatever. And there's a way you could convolute that argument to say that not providing creatine in the supplemental form is socioeconomic discrimination.
Could be.
That you know, there might be some kid who, you know, he's growing up and he's lives in a tough neighborhood and his parents are on food stamps and everything, and no, he can't afford fish. He can afford bologna, and you know, there's only so much creatine and only in bologna, and only so much bologna that you can eat. And if they want to get out of that kind of a place and get a scholarship as an athlete, then they're going to need to take creatine in order to do that. And I think that should be more of like a fundamental right that you could at least supplement your situation.
Think of like impoverished nations. And
Exactly.
This was one of the topics that we were discussing at the conference is what would happen if we took foodstuffs for, you know, you can't provide so much, it's a minimal amount of calories, you're just trying to prevent starvation. How much benefit could you have if you added just a gram or two of creatine to some of this foodstuff?
Fortification of food.
Fortification, and we're talking about food additive. There may be a lot of health benefits to do that. And one of the concerns we have as scientists is how many people have had issues that because they were told that creatine may not be safe or something, they got something on the internet and they didn't understand it, how many conditions could have been mediated or lessened because they were taking creatine? And I'm afraid that that's my concern about the kids. They need creatine as much as anybody, and we shouldn't be discouraging the use, whether it's from supplemental
Yeah.
or it's from meat. But, you know, meat's $15 a pound, depending what you buy. I mean, salmon can be really expensive, and who has that kind of money under our
Deli meat
situation?
nowadays is $10 a pound.
Yes.
Salmon's really expensive right now.
So it is cost effective because you can get a kilo for $30 or so, 35, whatever it comes out to. It's like 3 or 4 cents a gram. You need 2 or 3. You're talking 15 cents, 20 cents a day versus eating, a pound of meat or fish that can cost $5, $10, $15, $20 a pound. And so it's cost effective, and it has a lot of great health benefits.
So I do forget where I was going with this one. It was somewhere on these cost benefit analyses. I'm going to toss it up to you, TK. I'm going to come back to this.
Well, I just want to go back to this group, this political activist group. They're going after lots of supplements, just not creatine. They're just bundling creatine in this group because it's a dietary supplement, because it's under the muscle building category, correct?
Well, I mean, TikTok has similar regulations where you cannot promote anything that builds muscle or potentiates fat loss.
Right. And so, not that this is directly against this ingredient, it's that it's being grouped into it. And this is just one example of an ingredient that you should probably, if you're going to make a law around it, you should probably be a little bit more selective of what can and can't. And don't just say all weight loss and muscle.
They're throwing out every baby with the bathwater on this one.
Yeah.
So, like, you could make the same argument for calcium as far as a supplement. And, if it's increasing bone density or something and it might be helping muscle in a very indirect way, then all of a sudden that's going to be under lock and key too.
And so the argument is that it creates eating disorders. Is there any science on that?
No. There are a couple of very poorly designed studies that try to get people to say that there's some link. There's not. So their concern is that eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, those type of things, that those type of individuals start like a gateway by taking diet weight loss supplements. And therefore, if you don't let them have that, that's going to solve the problem. But you're talking about an eating disorder is a psychological issue. It's a medical issue that's dealt with. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily what they're eating. It's why they're not eating. Mm-hmm. Right? And if anything, creatine has been shown to reduce arrhythmias. So as you become anorexic, and you're not, one of the problems is they have electrolyte abnormalities and they have death from that.
So this
and they actually can prevent some problems.
Yeah. So this is counter to a solution.
But it's a group out of, I guess, Harvard, Stripe, and it'll be interesting what they respond to this. This is what we would call in the research areas a smackdown of
beta
bad theory.
I wish you were right, but it's almost as though you cannot fight emotion with logic. But in an objective, pure world, I would think that the logic argument would win out over this. But we have to overcome the emotional context of what's going on here.
So I'm confused as what is the motive then? Like, why?
Their motive is they think dietary supplements is a gateway to eating disorders.
And or performance-enhancing drugs, which is a new way that they have changed up their argument, at least in one state that I've seen.
Okay. And this is being presented in multiple states.
Yeah.
And what do we have? We have all this,
but it's not all streamlined in every state.
Okay. How do we counter this? Like, is this like a sneaky operation where they're just shotgunning?
I think they get a lot of publicity from just scaring people.
Yeah. Activism and all that
activism type things. And what has to happen is, even though you don't think it's going to have an effect, the scientists have to stand up and say, this is what the real results are. And then we have to get the public to understand that this is safe, effective, and this is part of good nutrition, not something that's going to cause a problem.
But if they're backed by Harvard, you would think that there was some credibility.
Yeah, but you would think so, but their research is very poor.
Well, so, you also have to consider that the people who are represented by that group, they're public health people. They don't understand things in the same more detailed context that you do. They're looking at statistics and trying to come up with what they think is causative, but it's not causative. I mean, it might correlate to it, but it's not the same. And their data is not going to show the same thing that yours is.
Yeah, but the epidemiological data also shows it's safe and it has health benefits. That's the counter to that. But the whole gateway to anabolic steroids, That's like saying if you lift weights, you're going to take steroids.
Yeah.
Well, there are some that lift weights and do, but that doesn't mean it's a cause effect. I drive my car to the gym. Does that mean that driving a car is going to then make me lift more weights and want to take anabolic? It's kind of nonsense causal type of relationships. And so what data creatine is not an anabolic steroid. If anything, it would reduce your interest in taking steroids because it has a lot of benefits.
Then why would a university system fund something like this?
Because there's a lot of political money going into centers that support efforts. So a political action group or another outside group can funnel money to a center at a university, fund positions or whatever.
Yeah.
And
So there's somebody there who has a job and wants to keep their job.
potentially
And
that, or they feel that they're on a crusade to try to save the world and thinks that this is something that's bad. And certainly eating disorders is horrible. We want to try to do what we can.
I think we can agree with that. We just don't think the supplements are the cause.
Correct.
Especially
Certainly
not creatine.
Certainly not creatine.
yeah, but it's getting bunched into this grouping.
Well, we were talking at the conference about why is it creatine being, pointed out. It's because it works. It's because people know it works, and that people are taking it. And
it's
they're taking
popular. There's content being made. There's
And it's
teenagers
clickbait.
taking it. Yeah.
creatine. It's like what caused the whole concern about creatine. This is also historical. In 98 or so, 97, there were 3 wrestlers that were trying to cut weight and died.
Oh, goodness.
Did you hear about this?
No, but
So
I mean,
here-
those are very extreme scenarios.
So listen,
because I wrestled, I know what that's like.
So the front page, USA Today, New York Times, creatine linked to death. You find out after they keep on digging that 2 never had taken creatine. One had stopped 6 months ago, had nothing to do with it. They were doing some severe weight loss type of things. But that front headline caused a lot of articles of maybe creatine isn't safe. And that caused the whole adverse type of thing.
I remember in my teens when I first started taking it for weightlifting, the stigma was like this is a steroid and or it could be bad or harmful for you, or you could fail a drug test for your sports organization, which all has been debunked now.
Yeah, completely false. Right.
And so,
Well, the other thing was, remember Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa
Oh,
doing
yeah.
home
But
runs?
those guys were on androstenedione.
Well, they were on probably
more than
things
that.
too.
Yeah,
cocktail.
But what they saw next to the androstenedione bottle was a creatine bottle, so everybody linked it together.
okay.
And there are even studies that they reference from back in the 90s where those designer steroids were legal back in those days, where they're trying to, a lot of their arguments are based off of adverse events from those things, which are now completely banned and off the marketplace.
Right.
And according to Deshay, should have never been in the marketplace to begin with.
Correct. And the androstenedione sold never really worked at all. None of the studies showed it had any effect. So
Yeah.
they may have wasted their money, but the creatine certainly did. And even in baseball, the Gorilla Ball back in the early 90s, LSU and others were hitting home run after home run. They're one of the teams started taking creatine. And so there was certainly performance enhancement. You are more powerful if you take creatine. You can do more reps and more swings in an at-bat, but that's not anabolic steroids. That's energy.
Are there any baseline studies that exist that show, compared to placebo, what a full loading protocol and at the end of I guess that 30 days or whatever, where a fully saturated muscle with phosphocreatine does, and what that measurement is by percent as far as strength increase?
On average, if you take creatine for 4 to 8 weeks, you see an increase of muscle creatine by 20 to 40%.
Yeah.
And then you see an increase in performance, power, strength, 15 to 20% on average.
That's substantial.
Yeah, and so, if you take it, for example, our one study, we get 25 grams a day. I mean, you're talking about 15, 20 pounds on a bench and 30, 40 pounds on a squat. And 4 or 5, we had 3.5 kgs. That's about almost 6 pounds of muscle.
Yeah.
In resistance-trained athletes that already have a lot of muscle, that was pretty impressive. And because the gains were so big, then everybody also thought it had to be a steroid. Well, it's not.
Well, there's a lot of mythology out there currently on the internet where people say creatine's a steroid, and even that is something that we're still working this day to bust that myth.
When I was at Cellucor and I was in customer service, we got that question all the time called in. If I have my teenager who's taking this, will he fail a drug test for his yada, 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 because we think that there may be links to performance enhancing drugs. And we had a script, and it would be like, well, not that we know of. No. There are
I've not
studies.
seen any study that person became positive on taking creatine. Now, if they became positive, maybe because there was something else that they were taking along with it.
Tainted products do
or
exist.
a tainted type of product where sometimes, groups will, back in the day when they did pro-hormones, there would be some residual from vats and things that they would do, and that was a concern. But we always tell folks, get NSF certified sources, go after the bigger brands because they do have usually a better job of the quality assurance and GMP, and take creatine alone, and you don't have to worry about what it's coming with.
Yeah. So are most of these studies monohydrate, HCl? Does it matter?
Yeah, so we always thought it would be a high percentage. It's actually 95% of the 680 studies. Almost all the studies are on creatine monohydrate, and that's all primarily from Germany. So there's only, for example, you see the gummies, HCl and all that. There's only been 5 studies on HCl that I'm aware of. None of them show better efficacy than creatine monohydrate.
In my mind, I think creatine is creatine.
Well, it is, but it can be delivered with other things. So,
Yeah.
There may make a difference in stirring it and whether it mixes easier. As long as it gets in the body, it's creatine. It has to be a form of creatine that will get in the blood, markedly increase in the blood, and go through the transporters. And so that's creatine monohydrate because the water pulls off, and you basically have creatine. And any source like a creatine salt that separates like that should serve as a source of creatine. There are other things bound, though, that will not break up. So, for example, the Bang Energy drink with CLL, right? No study showed that even was digested, broke down, did nothing to blood level, did nothing to muscle, did nothing to tissue, brain, all the stuff in animals and humans. That's why they lost a huge lawsuit.
All right, I'm going to pause it right here because we're about to breach a new subject of the current status of creatine, the different forms of creatine and all that. And then I want to talk about a little bit of fortification here in a bit. We'll take a bathroom break, and we'll be right back. All right, folks, this episode is brought to you by the Future Nutra Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit organization for the nutraceutical industry. Imagine a world where every dietary supplement you take is safe, effective, and scientifically validated. At the Future Nutra Foundation is not just a dream, it's our mission. We're dedicated to transforming the nutraceutical industry through rigorous scientific research, comprehensive education, and unwavering advocacy for public health and safety. But we can't do it alone. Your support can make a real difference. With your donation, we can drive innovation, ensure regulatory compliance, and provide the public with the reliable information that they need to make informed health choices. Join us in our quest to create a healthier tomorrow. Visit futurenutra.org and make your donation today. Together, we can build a future where trust in dietary supplements is a given, not a question. The Future Nutra Foundation, science, safety, and a healthier tomorrow. Thank you for your support.
All right, and we're back. I had a few questions that I wanted to ask Joe. I don't know if you had something you were talking about.
I can hold off. I got these for days, but I know exactly what I want to ask.
So formats with creatine, why don't you see it, like we're seeing an emergence, at least on our end, in the gummy format. We talked about it a little bit. There are hundreds of creatine gummy brands that are popping up everywhere. I know that Now Foods, was it Now Foods?
Yeah, they ran a little study with Price Plow on it to see who had creatine and who did not.
And a lot did not. And there was something about, I guess, the manufacturing process, and most people have ironed that out. But I wanted to know specifically, because I've been sitting on this idea, and I'll kind of make it public, but and if anyone hears this and takes my idea, you're hiring us, damn it.
Trademarked.
Yeah. Why don't you see more creatine in liquid form? We talked about Bang a little bit, and it's not, I guess, available. But we had this idea, Joey and I, on a concept that we want to debut this year with a project we're working on with it in like fat-soluble things like milk.
pH is great.
So why don't you see it in this type of
the
product?
reason you don't see it is because creatine will convert to creatinine when it's set at room temperature for long enough. And usually the initial study showed it take about 3 to 5 days to lose 20, 30% of the creatine and converts to creatinine. So the issue is shelf life. If you produce a product, by the time it gets to market and the consumer buys it, it may be several months. And by then you're probably going to be down to 20, 30% creatine in the product. There are a few patents out there that show 70% after like 3 months. The problem is it going to meet the label? So you'd have to put in extra amount to account for the loss over time, or put a fresh date count. So that's really been the issue of why liquid's been more difficult. So there's been a lot of efforts to try to put in a gel suspension or encapsulate it somehow, or liposomal also could potentially do it. And the whole point is it's got to dissociate once consumed in the body. So whatever vehicle or what you attach or connect it or coat it, it's got to be delivered. And so I think that a coating that's pH targeted, so it can be stable in a fluid and normal pH ranges is 6 to 8 or so. But then when it gets in the stomach, maybe breaks that bond, might be the way to go. We're actually talking to a couple companies, giving some advice on how to do those type of things. But it's got to be stabilized, and then it's got to be real creatine when it gets in the blood. And so what's happened most of the time is that if you bound it and it was stable in the fluid, when it got to the body, it never became creatine. It just stayed or get eliminated or whatever. And so that's the really challenge. And then the shelf life. For viability, you really need a 6 to 9 months or so shelf life.
Yeah, but for our argument is that milk gets drinking within a couple weeks either. Anyways.
Yeah, that's my point. So if there's a date stamp within 2 weeks and you refrigerate it, that's another way to stabilize creatine. And maybe have it.
That's what we thought it was the best case scenario. It's not going to get hot. It's roughly a neutral pH, and you got to drink it quick.
And you got to consume it within a certain time, or it gets bad. So that might be an approach that could be done and be more reasonable.
See, I think that's incredibly that idea and a formula, like a baby formula.
Well, that's usually powder, and then you mix it. So if it's a powder and it mixes, it's not a problem.
But if you heat it up,
heating usually doesn't do a problem. And for example, one of the studies they did early on creatine looked at creatine cooked in meat, creatine provided in
that's a very good
powder
point.
form versus in a solution. And they even put a lozenge.
Okay.
And as long as every one of them were equal to 2 grams delivery, and the levels of blood changes were all very close to each other and all were viable. So when you cook meat, it doesn't really break down a lot of the creatine. It still delivers a lot. It's not even like 50%. It's just a little bit, if anything. And so if meat works still and you're cooking charcoaling and, then it's not going to cause a problem if you heat it up in microwave or whatever you're doing.
So we could assume to see more creatine plus products in the future, especially with this data and stuff that you're saying here. If it's, and you can tell me this, Joey, if it's let's say we lose the battle against it being in dietary supplements, could it potentially be in food items?
It's already approved by the FDA to put in as a food additive.
It is grass.
It's grass, and I think that's probably going to be the way to increase the availability in the general population to a great degree. I see it like you can add it to milk or some type of other common food. Even we have a group out of Colombia looking at vegan burger type of a source, and then
that's clever.
Adding it to that to be able to make sure there's enough
supplement the vegan. Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
So there's a lot of interest in it. In fact, at the conference, one of the groups actually made pancakes, and they have the pancake powder that's creatine enriched.
Interesting.
So it's high protein creatine.
Well, if you could do that with pancakes, you could do it with bread.
Yes. There's a lot of things you can do.
I mean, you're saying like a protein-enriched noodles, right?
Yeah.
You're even seeing snack chips now that are higher protein.
Yeah.
Right?
And we've got friends that have companies that do that. And it just makes sense to me that some of these ingredients that are so well commonly known are going to make their way into mass market food items as a functional.
I think that's
we're a pro-functional food podcast, I would say.
Oh yeah, it's good for us. But it, like what you're saying, safe in children. Children should be taking it. All ages should be taking it. Why isn't it more? There's stigma around certain groups and consumers that don't want to take a liquid, tincture. They don't want to take the powder. They don't want to go to the supplement shop. There's the stigmas sometimes with supplements being only associated with sports nutrition, muscle building, and the meathead sort of, stigma. But if it's in milk or if it's in your yogurt and you go down the aisle and there's just another one that says, oh, with added this, just like it says there's, milk with added
Vitamin D.
Yeah, right.
Yogurt's also another great one. So actually, I usually put my creatine in Greek yogurt in the morning, right?
Yeah.
Tastes good. I don't really notice any of the powdery version of it, and it eats. And you could see functional foods with creatine. I think that's the next wave that's going to happen. Because now, as the awareness in the public is increasing that this is an important nutrient to have in the diet, they're going to want to see functional foods with it. And I think that once you start, and I mentioned this last week, once you're going to start seeing instead of, keto friendly or something on the label, you see creatine contains 1 gram of creatine per serving or something.
We've already seen the proteinification of everything, and I think the creatinification is going to happen.
Yeah, there's a few ingredients I can see that, like choline, creatine, obviously more vitamins, vitamin E, vitamin D.
Omega-3s and eggs.
Yeah, like there's a lot of things that. But why don't you see more creatine? I don't know. I don't really understand. That's why I wanted to ask the question. Is it because no one thought of it? I don't think that's true.
I think they thought about it. They're looking at the marketing, and you have to have a certain number or amount of public awareness for them to adopt and say, hey, I want 2 items. Do I want to pay a little bit more? It says creatine. Yeah, I would do it. And there have been over the years creatine energy bars and a lot of really good things. It's just about mass sale. Can you get it in the market in an easy way to do manner and a scalable system?
I think now is a good time because just if you go online and TikTok and all that stuff, there's plenty of information out there and people making content.
One of the things we did with our safety study, we looked at a sentiment analysis on creatine. Okay,
Interesting.
and we looked at TikTok, Twitter, X, and YouTube statements, and over the last 2 decades, it's been every day or so, 25, 30,000 searches, unique searches. The last few years, it's skyrocketed. And I think that's part of getting the information to the general public that creatine is not just for athletes, it's for you at all your ages. That's going to drive demand for the functional food market. And I think that is really the future. And there are some groups working on products that will focus on that. And I think whoever hits that, even with protein powders, if you're selling whey protein, why doesn't it have a gram at least?
Yeah, I put it in my protein. I was telling you, I put it in my son's.
Yeah.
And, I never knew what the dosage was, so I always gave him a little bit. But I know that there's a significant difference, or I think there is, in his mental cognitive function. Like he just seems to pick up things a lot quicker than most kids his age. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I add choline and creatine into his shakes and his protein shakes.
The body's developing. It needs the fundamental nutrients.
Well, you
to
said
be able to
here in
grow.
this paper that most children, like under certain ages, are deficient in creatine. And that's mostly because they're not getting it in their food, right?
Yes, either have the enzyme deficiencies, which is kind of rare, or they're just not consuming enough meat and fish in their diet as they're growing.
Yeah, my kid's 4. He doesn't eat fish.
Yeah.
Does he eat steak?
He doesn't eat beef.
Yeah.
So where are you going to get creatine if you're not getting it from meat and fish? So that's why functional foods and things that kids would like to consume.
Yeah, he'll eat a French fry. He'll drink milk.
Well, I think that's interesting. And I recently worked on a protein cereal that had creatine. One of the main hurdles that I had, and maybe this is one of the things that like prevents the creatinification of everything, is when we sent it off to a lab for analysis, they had like a freak out because they didn't know what to do. They're like, this isn't going to solubilize. And I had to get on the phone with him and be like, why don't you just, I don't know, crush it into a powder like all the other powders you get in the mail. And then they like their guard kind of dropped and they're like, oh, that actually might work. And I'm just like, okay, thank you.
But a cereal with higher protein content and some creatine would be amazing.
Yeah.
The challenge also is you're going against big food, and it's hard to get into shelf space and all this type of things. But I think if there are energy bars or things that could kind of come in to help, would be, but certainly
I think a lot
foods
of
would be amazing.
A lot of the like functional plus on the grocery level when it comes to these types of products, and you're seeing smaller boutique grocers prioritize these type of brands. So like if you go on the West Coast, there's
Whole
like
Foods.
Erewhon, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, and they have they have sizable customer demographics. They have a lot of foot traffic, and it's a lot easier as an up and coming brand to get into the Sprouts of the world than it is the Kroger, right?
But at the same time, like one of the comparisons I like to make is if you go into a gas station, the sodas used to be across the entire wall of that fridge, and slowly but surely we have chipped away, and now there's an entire section for electrolytes, an entire section for protein, probably multiple sections for energy drinks, and that soda section shrunk more and more and more. You go to the cereal aisle at our local HEB here.
So soda brands are buying those other companies now.
Yeah, several billion-dollar deals have gone on this year.
Yeah, free.
But in the cereal aisle, you go to the cereal aisle, you've got your regular traditional Kellogg's General Mills wall of sugary stuff. But if you turn around, there's an entire functional cereal side. Everything from granola to protein-enhanced cereal to keto cereal, all this other stuff.
I've seen it in pasta too.
But it's starting to slowly just take over. And keep in mind, we got to cut ourselves some slack. It's been in the last 100 years, we've witnessed an industrial revolution of food where we just went after everything that, we made everything taste as good as it possibly could. We got a whole bunch of, non-communicable metabolic diseases that cropped up, and now we're trying to functionalize everything. And I think this is just a massive course correction of, okay, we made everything taste good, kind of gave us diabetes and heart disease. And we're trying to steer it back over with the functionalization of everything and including, higher quality proteins in our diet. And, hopefully, the creatine revolution starts to rage even more because we have these medical applications. We have these, we know that, kids and elderly people are deficient in potentially having creatine because they just don't eat meat. But it's something that's vital to every cell in our body, and it's something that is completely safe and it probably should be considered an essential nutrient. And these kinds of things are going to start dropping into regular foods and stuff. And I think especially because we've food science has come a long way in the last 100 years, that we're going to start to engineer these foods with more intention than just being flavor.
We're doing some interesting stuff with potentially with NASA.
Yeah.
How are you going to get people to Mars if they can't have all the foods and things? You better have some functional options that have all the nutrients they need.
I got my first functional product up on the ISS 1 year ago, pretty much like this month.
It's there right now.
Yeah, that's cool. And so they're looking at those strategies. And
they need to. Everything needs to be functional, especially in that environment where you're getting bombarded with radiation and you ain't got no gravity to pull your blood into your feet.
Or you have to grow, because that's also another area. You might have to grow the plants for 3 years. They got to go back and forth, right? So I think all those avenues are really interesting, and creatine should be I think it's a conditionally essential nutrient, but you minimally have to have it in your diet. And if you're not eating lots of meat and fish, you're not.
Yep.
And so what's the best alternative? The cheapest alternative is adding a little bit of creatine monohydrate to your foods, or adding it in through a supplement. So either way, as long as you're getting the creatine, I think that's the important thing.
Well, and those guys in space, they exercise. They have mandated exercise, both cardiovascular and strength training every single day. To maintain their muscle mass. And if they're not taking creatine, that's a serious disservice. Because I guarantee, they're dehydrated or retorted or whatever foods that they have. There's probably not enough fish. There's probably not enough meat. And then protein availability is not going to be substantial enough.
One of the nutritional things they did change was they added the protein. And they noticed this right early on the Apollo and early missions. And so they understand they need more protein, but if it's not quality protein, you're not going to get the best adaptation. And if it doesn't contain creatine, or they don't have any other sources of creatine, you're going to have a long-term deficiency going on. And then you're going to have poor cognitive function, maybe some adverse health effects like the lower intakes are showing in the NHANES data. These are real issues.
Right here in your NHANES data in this letter that you said, it says that less than a gram a day was associated with poor cognitive function test performance among 1,340 adults.
Older adults too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Does it make you wonder, like, I don't know, have we, like, you look back on, like, all history, you know, like, maybe Neanderthals were consuming more meat or something like that, but it's like, have we been shortchanging ourselves with the kind of, like, common standard American diet that we have nowadays?
Yes.
I mean, it's just full of processed foods or
Processed
whatever.
foods and convenient, taste great. We overeat them, but you look at the historical food. It was a lot of meat and fish.
Yeah.
You know, and
And
plants,
fresh vegetables.
and plants, right? So that's kind of, and as I mentioned, Eskimos, they had a diet of 4 to 6 grams of creatine per day because they were eating that much fish.
Yeah.
So is it that we're seeing deficiencies actually because we've changed our diet and made it more processed? We need to get back to normal, you know, higher content of quality meat and quality plants and things to be able to offset it. That may be where we have to go. Better, you know, fresher, higher quality.
And I think intention has to do a lot with it. And if we can make things fun, I look at it like, you know, okay, people, you like these processed foods and stuff. So like if we can actually make these processed foods have more nutritional value than they were originally designed. Yeah, does it increase the cost? But like, you know, people will pay $3 for a protein bar versus I guess what? It's now over $2 for a standard candy bar. So if it's only one more dollar to have something that doesn't have deleterious effects to your health, I think it's worth it.
Absolutely.
Or an energy drink, a Gatorade type of thing where it's $2 or $3 a bottle. Man, throw something in there, you get some nutrient density out of it as well. So that's where I think the more functional foods or higher quality drinks and things that actually have nutrient levels that can really have some
TV?
benefit. Certainly.
What?
Do you have the remote for the TV?
He does.
Okay. I was going to show you because yesterday there was a story that came across Stack 3D News, and there's a new brand out called Creatine. Get it?
Creatine.
Get it?
I thought that was pretty clever.
So they are the first creatine. They allege that they are the first stabilized creatine beverage, and they've got a couple other formats. Like I think there's a pre-workout or something like that. But like, I think that I'm familiar with the raw material that they're using, and I think it has to do something with like a microencapsulation technology. They have a 12-month shelf life, but the creatine has to be overaged by 50%. So if you're putting 5 grams in, you need 7.5.
Which means a lot of it's going to creatinine.
Yeah. Well, it's a ticking time bomb, right? It's a ticking time bomb over that 12-month shelf life of that creatine turning into creatinine, and eventually after 12 months, all of a sudden it's not going to meet label claim. So
Does creatinine convert back
that's
to
it right
creatine?
there.
It not that I'm aware of. So it is a cyclical process, but I'm not aware that it converts back in the body. There's really no enzyme to kind of force it that way. So what happens typically is your creatine's turned over, it becomes creatinine, it's excreted. I don't know that it's around long enough to even potentially convert back, why it would. So I don't see that the benefit of consuming creatinine, other than, just like I said earlier, there's some studies showing that if you do have some creatinine, it can stabilize the creatine. So maybe after a while, the creatinine accumulates, and then it kind of stabilizes the further reduction of the creatinine. But this is the issue with the drinks, is that how long is the shelf life, and how much is it going to convert to creatinine? Versus just using the powder, and you're getting 100% creatine.
You know, if those things have like cold chain transportation, I would believe in this thing a little bit more if they were sent on refrigerated trucks.
That would help. When you refrigerate creatine in fluid, it helps maintain.
So yeah, they actually. I guess this is like our product review section here. It says creatine.
Yeah. So my question always to the folks that come out with these is, where's your data? And
Yes.
if they have data that shows stability and bioavailability in the body, because you don't want to encapsulate something that won't break down once it's in the body.
Have you heard of this Active R? What is that up there? Active TR microencapsulated.
I'm pretty sure this is Glanbia's technology.
Well, they didn't they have the Korea Bev?
Yeah.
So did they just label that? Korea Bev is another one that says it has about 70% stability after about 10 months or so or a year. And so some
Don't
of
do the AI thing. Keep going. So,
Yep, right
yeah,
there,
that one,
Glanvia.
Glanvia.
yeah.
So, for those of you who don't know at home, Glanvia is one of the larger whey protein conglomerates on planet Earth. But they have so this is a microencapsulated particle of creatine.
Yeah. So the question then would be: is when does it break down?
Yeah.
At what pH does it break down? Does it hit the stomach and break down? Okay, that would work. Or how long is it stable in fluids so that there's the shelf life you need?
Or is it thermal? So they've got a couple other different things. Nutrients for cold form. That's for sports nutrition bars.
Well, says
Okay, keep going. Keep going. These are just what they're using. They say it for gummies, and it's encapsulation by spray drying. All right, back to this. Do they have any data? So
Significantly elevated after 3 hours after drinking.
that could be anything.
You can put the creatine monohydrate. It's going to be significantly elevated after 3 hours of drinking. Yeah, well, it's got paraxanthine too, so they're adding a few other things to it.
Well, they've got a couple of different formulations. So yeah, if you scroll over, keep scrolling.
Yeah, somebody sent me that because my
Keep
name's
scrolling.
KRE.
Oh,
They're thinking, Doc, did you come out with a drink?
that
No.
one. Look at that one. Muscle fuel and recovery.
it looks good. I love the package.
It's got 3 grams of creatine, 30 grams of whey protein. Okay, well that makes sense because that's not as acidic. I would think that that's some sort of
Well,
hot
there is the
fill.
one patent that it's combining it with a whey protein to try to stabilize. Again, I
Okay.
haven't seen the bioavailability data to say, okay, this is going to dissociate, this is going to increase, and it's stable over time. If they've got the data, now usually when we contact them, they sometimes will share their general stuff, but they don't want to share all of it. And so that's
That's
the
kind
question.
of a bummer though, because you would think that they would be proud, especially if they have patents.
Yeah, I think they're worried about people knocking them off and those type of things. But if it's a patent, it should be somewhat protected, right?
Yeah. Or
Well,
unless it's
I
a
have
completely
seen this one. I've not seen it with this product, but I've heard about this particular form. Need to see the data.
Yeah.
mean,
I wanna
keep
see
on-
the data.
I keep on telling them these type of groups come out with a PKA study, show it increases blood levels, similar level to the creatine monohydrate. If it works similar to creatine monohydrate, then it's about a cost effectiveness, and it increases tissue level. Because if it's attached to something, the question is it going to get through transported the same way?
exactly.
And so these transporters are very specific. If you read the data on the transporters, very specific to exact creatine. Any alteration, there's actually like 2 doors in the transporter. One will let it in just general things where it thinks and recognizes the creatine, but if it's not exactly creatine, it actually will not let it go into the cell. It's like a protection mechanism.
Huh.
Pretty interesting. And so it's almost like a bouncer. You get through the first gate.
Does it allow GAA?
Yes, GA goes in because it's a different
Similar
transporter.
enough.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a different transporter.
Yeah, I don't think GA goes through the transporter.
Probably goes through the
mono.
monocarboxylate transporter.
Yeah, there's a different delivery, which is why it gets in the brain better.
Okay.
But it's got to increase in the blood. It's got to increase the tissue level. And if you can show that a liquid version increases and it's similar to creatine, okay,
So you think they need to go all the way to muscle biopsy?
absolutely.
In order to, okay.
Or MRS spectroscopy.
Aren't those more expensive?
Well, they're either expensive. You either have to pay the participant more because you're doing a biopsy, or it's about the same.
How many subjects have you had come into your studies that are excited about getting a muscle biopsy?
Actually, we did quite a few biopsies over the years, and usually the people don't have a problem with it.
How big a chunk are you taking out of their muscle?
It depends if you do a fine needle aspiration method, which is a very small amount. Which
Okay.
a lot of people are using now, Willoughby and others. If you use the Bergstrom, you're doing 100 to 200 micrograms. It's a little bit of a snip,
Okay.
so it's not a lot.
So it's not like you're taking a true core sample out of their way.
No, you're not taking a real thick amount of muscle out.
Maybe in the horses.
Yeah, you probably get away with a bigger gauge needle and window for that. But for the human, it's only about 100 to 200. And you kind of get in there and you twist it and snap it a couple times. It has a window that captures the tissue.
So are you pulling fluid out of the cell, or are you just taking a chunk of cell?
Taking a chunk of the tissue.
Okay.
So you're basically getting all the muscle and the fibers, whatever's coming with it.
Okay.
And then you have to actually separate it out and make sure you have the tissue. And then we have to freeze it right away. Put it right into liquid nitrogen so that it captures and holds the creatine and the phosphocreatine all the same, because we keep on metabolizing otherwise.
Yeah, the train keeps going down the track.
Right. If it thinks it's anaerobic, no oxygen's going to burn it up.
It's going to freak out.
Yeah. So, those have been done. We did a bunch of those studies at A&M and at Baylor as well, and even in Memphis. Yeah.
Okay. Now, as far as the different forms of creatine that are out there, we kind of touched on this earlier, but I don't know. As far as the ones that are out there, there's crealkaline, there's creatine hydrochloride, there's creatine nitrate, there's creatine pyruvate, creatine monohydrate, we talked about extensively, and tried creatine citrate, which is another one. Are there any other forms of creatine outside of monohydrate that you have like a favorable opinion on?
95% of the studies have been done on creatine monohydrate.
Yeah.
And that's what the database is based off of. There's a handful, I think probably 20 studies on other forms.
Yeah.
None of them show they're better than creatine monohydrate. A couple show that they can increase creatine to a little bit, but like ethyl ester and nitrates, and you have to deliver the same amount of creatine to get to the cell.
Right.
So in a bioavailability paper we have, you can probably put up on your thing, is that there's a diagram of different forms of creatine and how much actual creatine's in them. And so you'll see like HCl is about 60% and nitrate's about 50%. And so creatine monohydrate delivers 88%. And so as long as you equate those and the actual increased creatine in the blood, it should have the same. But what happens is a lot of times they'll say, oh, ours is absorbed faster, so you don't need to take as much as creatine monohydrate. And that's where the real error is, because the studies don't show that. We did creatine nitrate, creatine ester, creatine serum, cracklin, all these type of alternatives. And if they increase creatine, you'll get a little bit of benefit, but not nearly as much as you give the equal amount of creatine monohydrate, because it's just not delivering the same amount.
And that extra 12% on the monohydrate, is that just for water, or what's that?
Yeah, the difference is the monohydrate, is to cleave that off, it's 88% creatine and 12% the monohydrate. And so everyone, like creatine nitrate, is about 50-50.
Yeah.
And so I get lots of nitrates, which is good for vasodilation and like beetroot juice type of effect.
Yeah.
But I don't deliver enough creatine to get the creatine effect. So
Yeah.
you have to, if you used it, you'd have to take creatine monohydrate plus the creatine nitrate to kind of get the same effect on creatine.
Some people say that monohydrate creates more bloating because of
I guess the water molecule?
water
False.
retention.
False.
Can you explain that?
Creatine itself, when it gets absorbed into the cell, is sodium and glucose dependent to get through the transporter, and you may get a little bit of fluid from extracellular to intracellular, but not total water disproportionate to the muscle. So if you measure just total body water, you might see a little bit increase in water, but that's because you're increasing muscle mass.
Okay.
Muscle mass is 80% water. So if I gain 10 pounds, 80% of that's going to be water and 20% is actual protein, right? So all the studies that looked at bloating and all that show that there's no difference of people taking placebos versus creatine.
So do you think there's anything to it where people say like, oh, creatine gives me a tummy ache or something like that? Like, I remember working in retail, how I'd get totally nauseated with people like, this creatine hurt my stomach.
I think it's conditioned from what they're reading about potential side effects, and when they see an advertisement, like our form doesn't cause bloating.
Yeah.
The studies don't show does cause bloating, but they're thinking, oh, that's a side effect, and therefore it's got to, maybe I'll feel something weird. But when you compare it to placebos, it's actually the same or lower in a lot of conditions of these side effects.
Yeah, I would have to, if you've taken creatine long enough, you kind of realize that the bloat allegations are pretty unfounded.
Just basically just debunk everything. How safe and how great it is, and it's just crazy that it's even being bundled into. What I noticed is some of these companies and brands, they could find a way around it just by not having muscle building type of
Claims on it. Yeah.
As simple as that.
Well, that's how they sell them on TikTok, is they don't claim that it will build muscle tissue.
Well, there's some saying, hey, like I get like a bigger butt.
Yeah. But that, does that have anything to do with muscle tissue? I mean, butt could be made out of anything.
Yeah. That's a weird one.
Yeah.
But they do sell a lot of them in
There is creatine now to make people's butts bigger. It literally comes in a butt-shaped bottle.
Yeah.
Marketing.
And, absolutely. But the whole, I would say over the last 10 years, this fixation with women getting gigantic glutes and like the Brazilian butt lifts and everything. All of a sudden that's a new phenomenon where women are looking for creatine to make bigger butts.
Well, Caduce Max was a big muscle.
Yeah.
And so if you're training it, and you might get some hypertrophy to those areas, but it's not because of any specific creatine. It's just the overall energy that's provided in the muscle you're working.
That's the marketing magic, where they're like, okay, if you take this, it's going to make your butt bigger. Well, what they don't tell you is, if you work out your arms, it'll make your arms bigger.
That's
too.
right. That's right.
It's just those unspoken things about it. There was, I want to say there's more myths that I was thinking of, but I'll probably come back to this.
We actually wrote 2 papers in the International Society of Sport Nutrition Journal, JISSN, on common myths about creatine.
Oh, are there more myths that I'm missing?
Oh, we had so many myths in one paper, we had to do a second paper.
Okay.
Creatine and baldness, you mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
No effect on baldness. So we actually looked at, in this paper we're about to publish, 35 mentions of side effects or things that were looked at in the studies to see if there was a side effect. And nothing showed up compared to placebo. There was one instance where a few more studies reported bloating and muscle cramping. We think that's because they were responding to the anecdotal information out there. We better mention this. But when you look at the total number of participants who cramped and had bloating and stomach upset and all these different side effects, absolutely no difference whatsoever. Broken down overall by age, by sex, by training status, by amount taken, by type of creatine, all these type of things. There was, in the sentiment analysis in the internet, a little bit more complaints about HCl. And
Really?
Maybe because it's more acidic or something. I don't know.
Now, I could see that causing a little bit more stomach upset.
Yeah, and also we looked at all the adverse event reports in the databases for the U.S. and Europe and all that. 28 million, and there was only 0.0007% mentioning of creatine.
That was in this letter.
And a lot of them were inaccurately mentioning, because somebody had a problem. So what are you taking? Oh, we took these. So they said they were taking creatine, but then they were taking drugs and they're taking all these other things. And some of the products, about 40% of them, didn't even have creatine. When we looked at the product, there was no creatine in it at all. So they were just basically nothing in the AERs that would suggest any problem. So we looked at prevalence of number of studies, the number of participants on or off creatine, sentiment analysis, and that AER analysis completely shows absolute safety with creatine, up to dosages up to 14 years, up to high doses, and even in children with up to 80 grams or so.
Whoa.
So it's just absolutely nothing. We feel it's the mic drop moment for creatine and safety. That supports the children data. It supports all the data that has been talked about for safety over the years, the position stands, and just basically says, folks, there's nothing here.
So letters like this is trying to help combat the different state level. Have like a force.
If you really think about it, these kinds of laws and what they're promoting is in fact misinformation. It's misinformation that they are trying to get laws passed based on misinformation. So like there's an element of nefarious intent here, because the facts state something that is completely counter to what they're claiming.
What's up, everyone? TK back here. I'm going to talk to you guys about the Supp Works podcast. For everyone that's been listening in since we started this thing in January, I just want you to know that we are so damn delighted to have you guys as listeners. The audience has grown, the engagement has grown, the viewerships have grown. It's been pretty wild to see. But with all this growth, it comes with quite quite a cost. And that's why the Supp Works podcast is looking for sponsors. Now, we have started off with some sponsors in the beginning, and they were great partners. But to be honest with you guys, I never really charged them because I didn't feel like our audience was large enough to basically pay for whatever cost I was having to expend in doing the podcast. And just so you guys know, these podcasts, they cost a lot of money. We got to fly someone in. We got to put them up in a hotel. We feed them. We usually take them out to some sort of event. It adds up. It costs quite a bit. And we subsidize these costs with sponsorships. So if you own a business, whether it's in manufacturing, you're a raw ingredient supplier, you own a brand, maybe you have some sort of supplement or CPG type service that applies to the supplement industry or the CPG industry as a whole, and you think that our audience, which is usually movers and shakers within the CPG industry, you're talking CEOs, owners of businesses, top sales executives, and then the whole gambit in between super users all the way up into founders of companies basically listen to our podcast. If you think that audience is for you and it would work for your business for us to advertise on this platform, hit us up. Just send us a DM. Send us an email, tk@nutramedia.co, or send Joey a DM, and we can talk about our sponsorship packages. And basically, you get this. You get a 1-minute table read where we talk about your brand, and obviously, this has got to be something that we approve of and we support. But if there's a good partnership there, reach out. Maybe we'd be interested in having you as a sponsor. So if you want to sponsor the Supp Works podcast, just go and hit us up, and you can have your table read right in the middle of the podcast while we do our breaks, just like now.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not only poor marketing or trying to get market advantage by saying theirs doesn't do this and this one does. Look at WebMD. Even WebMD has some misinformation about creatine. It says one of the side effects, it could cause bipolar disorders. Really? And I looked, does anybody know anything? All the studies show it reduces depression.
Yeah, I'm sure there's evidence to the contrary if you look in the literature.
So, part of it is people are lazy. Reporters, when I talk to them off the time, say, "Oh, I'm doing an article on creatine. Can you tell me what this is?" It's like, well, here, read these 3 or 4 papers first, then call me and see if you have any questions. But they're writing the articles. Mm-hmm. So then the misinformation gets propagated by another article that's it's next thing you know, there's a lot of misinformation out there. When you look at the actual literature, it's safe, effective for all ages.
Eduardo, do you have ChatGPT? I'm interested to see what the AI has to say about creatine side effects. And if you've got deep research, I would want to do the comparison on that one.
That should be interesting.
Because the deep research ChatGPT, the other button.
Oh, which one?
Water retention and weight gain, bloating, stomach discomfort, muscle cramps, diarrhea, kidney damage.
No.
Myths. That's under myths and misunderstood risks.
Yeah, that's good. At least that's getting out there.
All right.
Yeah, it's like completely inaccurate.
Short, long term.
Huh?
Yeah, put short-term and long-term side effects.
Or just say all the above.
Give thee all of them.
All right, now scroll up to the first one because this one's going to take a second. Now, under myths and misunderstood risks, scroll down there.
Weight gain, yes.
Yeah.
Water retention, no. Dehydration, no. Opposite effect.
Yeah.
Kidney damage, absolutely none. Diarrhea, absolutely not. I don't know where that came from.
Micronized creatine may be easier on the stomach.
By its nature, it's an osmolytic on its own. I mean, like it does love water, but I don't see how it would be so much to where you'd have 5 grams cause diarrhea.
No.
There's not enough payload.
But again, we've provided 25 grams a day for 12 weeks in athletes during heavy training, hot and humid environments, high intensity. And then there's been studies like in Parkinson, the long-term study in Parkinson was up to 8 years with 10 grams a day. And then there's been other studies up to 30 grams a day.
Is it still taking its time?
Populations.
So perfectly safe. So it seems.
Well, the thing is, I'm glad that ChatGPT said do 3 to 5 grams a day.
Yeah.
Can I also get verification that I believe it was in an ISSN stand on creatine publication that you guys had made, that you can reach full saturation within 30 days at a 3 grams per day dose without the loading phase?
Partially, yes.
Okay.
So here's partially. I still tell people to load. And the reason is you want
That's
to
most effective.
well, it maximizes creatine, so you get benefits sooner. The one study that they're basing the 30 days on
Yeah.
is also a paper that Harris and Hultman did, and they found that they gave 3 grams a day for 28 days.
Yes.
They got about 70% of the gain in creatine.
Okay.
And I don't think it was statistically significant, but it was 30% less.
Okay.
And so eventually, if you're an older person just taking it for general health, yeah, eventually you're going to keep your levels up and it'll get there. If you're looking at for performance or cognition, you really need to load.
What if you're someone who's already loaded?
If you've already loaded, you only need, we tell you 0.1 grams per kg to maintain.
Okay.
If you look at all the studies that have been done, the average is actually 0.17 grams per kg is what the maintenance and overall amount is. That's like 12 and a half grams a day from the studies over time, combining the loading plus the maintenance phases. So we use 0.1 as a guideline. That's more like in the 6, 7, 8 grams, depending on how big you are.
Yeah.
And that's also based on studies we did with football players. We did 24-hour urine creatine and creatinine excretion analysis. And if you are consuming enough creatine to maintain your levels, your creatine levels should be relatively low. If you're not consuming enough. If you're consuming too much, you'll urinate some out.
Yeah.
And so when we did the studies with 5 grams on those athletes, there was like no creatine at all in their urine. So we thought, oh, they're not getting enough. We went up to 10 grams, and then we got the 2 gram extra. So it was about 8 grams per day that they needed. And these are 220-pound athletes at pretty low body composition on average. But the bigger you are, the more you need to maintain. And so 0.1 grams per kg is a good kind of estimate.
So the 5-gram dose is usually based on the assumption of what kind of a body weight?
The average weight of all the creatine subjects is 75 kilo.
Okay. So that's actually not that heavy. That's like
No.
that's like 160 pounds.
Yeah, 70 kg is 154 pounds. So
Okay.
yeah, so this is, not all the studies you looked at athletes. So
Yeah.
5 grams may be enough for somebody 70 kgs or less.
But if you're 200 pounds plus,
No,
you might
need
as well be
0.1.
you might as well be getting 8 to 10.
Yes, and so the interesting thing that we presented that all the data, 0.17 is what came out. And so that's even more than we rate. So that's more like the 10 grams a day. That's also the level we're looking at in older folks because we want to have enough creatine to help the brain. And we're doing 6 and 12-week studies with them on that.
So I think this is pretty interesting that one of the revelations out of this conversation is we still may not be taking enough.
Probably.
I mean, what we just did here, this was 5, right?
That's what that's like the standard in which everyone in the supplement industry talks about.
Yeah,
5
and
grams a day.
that's on average okay, but if you're bigger, you need more. And so I think it's important to realize that we're learning more about dosages, and all that initial was all on the muscle.
Yeah.
We know other tissues like the brain need more.
Well, and it also makes you think if you're doing like in your study with doing the 10 grams and then they were excreting some, that there's got to be, what's the word? It's phlenic extraction. Is that the word where your organs and other tissues that are along the GI tract will take their claim before it ever gets to the peripheral tissues?
Could.
There's that, and then there's the greediness of all the other tissues. I'm sure even skin cells to some degree like to have some creatine.
Skin is also affected by creatine. That's why there's even creatine in cosmetics.
No way.
Yeah, for anti-wrinkle.
Really?
Patents have been on this, and there's several really large brands that use,
How's that, Deshay, or is that cosmetic use?
yeah, cosmetics supposedly.
Okay.
So yeah, there's interesting, and there's even fertility. So sperm or energy is ATP and PC basically.
Yeah.
So there's studies that show harder, stronger swimmers when men are given creatine, or they've even used it in vitro fertilization methods that put it in the medium and it improves the energy and availability.
Well, that's fascinating.
You're going to start taking more creatine for your other baby?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was one side effect that was reported. It was that there were 3 people reported that they got pregnant while on the creatine.
Is this reported from the males or the females?
I can't remember which one there were, but there was one study that did report that. It could be that there's more vitality, and it has been looked at, and there's a few studies actually showed some benefit. In our Creatine for Health and Disease paper we did a couple years ago, there's a section on fertility, and a few studies have looked at that.
Okay.
Another reason.
Well, it's just showing how universal this is. The creatine is beyond muscle growth, and it's disservice almost to even put it in that cage of this is a muscle growth product in the context of the law and everything that's going on.
It's a cell health nutrient.
It really is, and I'm a huge mitochondrial health fan. I've really been into mitochondrial.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Okay,
there's a whole bunch of mitochondrial dysfunction, dystrophies. Right?
Yeah.
And basically, when the mitochondria can't produce enough energy, it then relies more on the ATP-PC system, and having extra creatine helps mediate some of those negative health benefits. So we also did a paper on creatine and mitochondrial dysfunction, and there's a whole host of things. Even we haven't talked too much about concussion.
No.
When you have a concussion or traumatic brain injury, you cause injury to the brain. It needs more oxygen. It doesn't have the oxygen, so it depends on the ATP-PC. Another reason why you need more phosphocreatine. And so those is basically a mitochondrial dysfunction because you're interfering in the ability to produce energy and provide it because you don't have enough oxygen.
So in a way, like the phosphocreatine ATP system is like a backup generator for when the mitochondria is
it's like if
not doing as well.
If the electricity went out, you'd have lost your mitochondria, reduced the function. It's a backup battery to keep the lights going.
Is there an appetite for study for CTE and things like that?
Yes, there's actually been some studies of that, and we're actually trying to get some congressional appropriations to try to do a large-scale study at a number of universities, and primarily football players and soccer that are susceptible to concussion. We think that every military person ought to be having creatine in their rations. Or being as
so
a
go
food
ahead
additive.
and tell that story of when you were on Capitol Hill doing that whole thing.
So there's a task force for concussion and TBI that the Congress does. It's been around for over 20 years, since the Iraq days, when we had a lot of IEDs, I guess, and explosive devices on the side of the roads and things, and a lot of people had TBI. So what can you do about it? Well, we know that animals fed creatine in their diet, and you cause a concussion or cause a TBI, that the size and damage associated with it is about 30% less. In some studies, up to 50%. Same thing with stroke. Same thing with spinal cord injury. And so there's a strong amount of data in animals, at least, to show that it's protective against neurological damage, brain damage, et cetera. And so what we're trying to do is, if we know creatine's good for performance and just general health, and it could help prevent or reduce the severity of a TBI or concussion, we actually recommended in 2017 that all athletes involved in or military involved in anything that could put them at risk for concussion, spinal cord injury, ought to be taking creatine. And it's actually a legally liable situation if you're not allowing the folks to have creatine, or you're preventing the creatine to take.
Joey, do they currently have a creatine program?
I don't believe so. But it's been proposed to be part of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2025.
Man, that'd be a good contract.
Yeah, so we're part of that request. And the people in the military that know about creatine are recommending that we don't do more studies, we just get it to the soldiers that need it. We also, the pushback is a little bit from the docs, from my understanding. And so
Well, why would there be?
they're just very cautious, and but I've also talked to folks saying, we know this is what they need. Why in the world we don't? And we just got done doing this protein study with pork, which has higher EAA and higher creatine content, and showed that they recover better. And so MREs ought to have high quality protein and have a little bit of creatine in it. And if they're on the plant version of the MREs, they're not getting it.
How do you think that would be delivered? Would it be infused in the food, or would it be like just this little flavored stick pack that they would get, or what?
Either or. Right now, they have in the MRE some electrolyte packs and things that they could do. They can add a little bit in the MRE as a supplement.
That would make sense with the sodium glucose dependent transport.
And they don't have to worry about degradation and all that, but also a functional food.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna have plant-based proteins, then add some creatine to it to make sure that they're getting what they need.
So, Joey, to wrap this all up, how could we fight this? What do people need to do in order to get active, in order to help the powers that be sort of?
There's a couple of different ways you can. I know that the Natural Products Association is putting out different grassroots campaigns that you can go on and you can sign a petition. And what it does is it automatically tells your state representatives that that you're against these bills.
So MPA.
If you go to NPA National, I think they're a .com. They might be a .org. But if you go to it's Natural Products Association's website, and you can go there and you can sign up for these notifications. And like I said, if it's California, Colorado, Washington, Texas, Illinois, Michigan, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, there was one in Virginia. Some of these have already been struck down and they're not a problem anymore. But if
it passed in New York, did it?
Yes, it also passed in New York. But I mean, if you live in any of these states, you want to become involved, you can go to NPA's website.
If you live in any of these states, you're at risk of not being able to buy creatine online.
Yeah, I mean there's several different like blowback factors of this. You will have to be ID'd at your house if you buy this on Amazon, which incurs a certain amount of costs. Some laws have this set up to be in lock boxes that are going to be like behind the counter. So or just kind of like if you go into Walgreens, you're trying to get Sudafed D or something like that.
Yeah, you have to have an ID to purchase it.
You have to have an ID. You got to call some guy over to like unlock the thing and give it to you. And yeah, this is happening in several different states at one time. There are other trade organizations you can become involved with: the United Natural Products Alliance, Council for Responsible Nutrition, the American Herbal Products Association, and the Consumer Health Products Association. Any one of those 5 that I just listed, you can reach out to them and see how you can get involved, or you can follow my nonprofit, futurenutra.org, and we will be talking about more of that stuff as well.
And if you're on Instagram or Facebook or those things, you see somebody say something that's inaccurate, copy the paper and say, nope, you're wrong.
I did that, and Stripe blocked me.
Well, Stripe might get a little letter from some people in the future.
I mean, this is a pretty good start.
Yeah.
Because part of this is that you have to provide the evidence so attorneys can act.
Yeah.
And then you have to get the word out to the public and say, wait a minute, this isn't making sense. Why in the world are we doing that? I have no issue with doing things that can help reduce the incidence of eating disorders. Just don't lump creatine and things that are healthy for people as part of that.
Well, and there's so many, like you could say social media is a cause for eating disorders more than
Yes.
supplements.
So this committee of doctors that you have, Dr. Kreider, are they all on board on this? Do they have like a course of action, or is this letter kind of like your?
That's one thing, but we actually talked at the conference in Germany about how to dispel the myths, and part is being involved in podcasts. Part of it's collaborating with other projects that can look at safety. Part of it is if you hear it, just say this isn't correct. And then the other thing is getting the information to the legislators so they can make an informed decision. And I think a lot of them mean well. They're just hearing one side of the story. And then the other thing is we're going to go right to the folks that are making the push for this and say, listen, you're not factually correct. Your science is wrong. And you need to reconsider your position on this because you're putting yourself in legal liability.
I would buy tickets to watch that event.
Yeah, and maybe we need to have a debate go on or something.
I think that would be constructive. Yeah. More communication is always the answer. And just because you guys are on opposing sides of the fences doesn't mean like you can't have a civilized conversation.
Certainly. But, the point is that there's been too long where, as scientists, we just expect everybody to read our articles and get it.
Mm-hmm.
And
no,
people
it's
don't go to
the
PubMed
opposite.
to do that. Yeah.
Like it's so difficult to get people to understand the scientific literature,
Yes.
let alone the scientific literature that you're excited about.
Yeah, and then the other thing is we need to participate in translation of it into popular media, lay articles, those type of things. So I had kind of a challenge to our colleagues that, get involved. Don't think you just have to write it to your scientific journal and then that's it. If this is really something that's helpful for people, people need to know about it. You need to get involved and make sure that accurate information gets out.
Yeah, because when you read those things, you know, as a layperson, just kind of makes your eyes glaze over.
Yeah, and the pseudoscience sells it, right? So there's a little bit of truth in some of these products that are kind of pushing the limits on the claims. And so they bank on that. They're banking on the Creatine research. They're borrowing the science because they didn't do the studies themselves, but then they try to bring in all these other things. And then, unfortunately, it's out there, so people Google and they figure, oh, that must be the truth, and they're too lazy to look at the actual results of studies. And so we got to, as a scientific body, make sure that the information gets out properly, and at least that there's an alternative place. Our creativehealth.com website is trying to do that, and be a source of good information for people to make an informed decision.
All right, so we got to see what deep research said as far as creatine side effects.
One of the most popular, well-studied supplements. That's probably one of my articles.
That's a good start. Wait, go back up to the top. Let's see the first paragraph. Overall, the research has found creatine to be remarkably safe when used at recommended dosages. However, both scientific literature and user anecdotes discuss various side effects. And it's a comprehensive list of creatine side effects and distinguishing well-documented effects from myths or unsubstantiated claims. All right, let's keep going.
Not bad.
All right, weight gain and water retention. Okay, that's part of the point. So,
It says severity mild.
yeah.
Well, it says weight gain is due to water retention. There are studies showing it's not water, it's muscle, increased protein content.
Yeah, I mean, in intracellular water, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's just shifting.
Bloating, mild discomfort.
Common during high dose loading, no. We gave 25 grams a day.
Yeah, but it's also because now some people they do their 5 grams 4 times a day, and they'll be drinking more water in general. So I could see how they would feel gastrointestinal distress because they're like, oh, I've had to drink my apple juice with my creatine in it 4 times today.
Oh.
It might have to do with what you're mixing it in. It might have to do with a whole host of other things. It's not the creatine.
Go a little lower. It says dehydration, potentially serious if true.
But where's the AI getting this? It's getting it from
Anecdotes.
all sources. Anecdote plus what's in the scientific literature.
Deep research does have a heavier emphasis on. Oh, this is from an ISSN article. Well, but no, it scrapes the clinical
It
articles.
says no. It's a myth.
No, myth.
Yeah.
No
Oh,
evidence of
dehydration's a myth. Yeah, that's from the ISSN stand.
Okay, and so it said potentially serious kidney stress damage. No, myth. And healthy, no real harm. That's from the Mayo Clinic. Liver damage,
Not
potentially
supported.
serious. Not supported through PubMed.
So with that column's from the scientific literature?
Some of them.
Scroll up
Yeah, scroll up to the top of the
as far as what that column is.
evidence.
Yeah.
That's what the actual, yeah.
So there was only one out of all these. All the rest are no's. Hair loss is definitely a no. Dizziness is a no. Blood pressure is a no. Kidney stones is a no. We got a no on liver damage, a no on kidney stress, a no on dehydration, a no on muscle strains, pulls. I guess it will, and then also a no on cramping.
GI large single doses. I guess if you took 30 grams in one dose, maybe, but the study is up to 8 grams per dose. Not a problem.
Yeah. So there's really only 3 things, and a lot of them are pretty subjective.
Yes. And it's good they're citing a lot of our literature, I can tell. A lot
Yeah,
of
they're
stuff.
citing a lot of your literature.
You say C. Kreider et al. Well, that's not too bad.
You don't get any checks from GPT, do you?
No,
Well,
I don't get any checks from anybody.
I feel like that was kind of an interesting exercise to see like
How the internet is indexing
what the
this
robots think
Yeah.
based on scientific literature.
Well, when we publish this safety paper, it's going to be across the board no, because it's
Yeah.
definitive.
Well, here's another one: pregnancy and breastfeeding. There's emerging research interest that creatine during pregnancy because the developing fetus might benefit from extra creatine, especially during high. You've literally said this exact same thing.
Yeah, my daughter-in-law, we had her on creatine during the third trimester. Did I tell you this story?
Earlier, yeah.
Yeah. So, without a doubt, the doctors, and he's just bright as a tack, man. He's doing fantastic.
What did the doctor think? Did he ever find out that,
Yeah,
creatine?
they were amazed how well the baby and the mom did. And they're like, what? And so we shared with them some of the data afterwards. He's like, wow, this is amazing. And so, because it's one of those conditions where there's a lack of oxygen supply, and it could cause a problem. And it was a longer than normal delivery, too.
Yeah.
And so they were a little concerned, but man, he came out, the kind of kid he looked like, came out like Arnold looking.
Like,
Creatine baby.
yeah.
So that's what it's for. And so, you never know. And I think what you're going to see is add it to the formulas, because there is studies from Stacey Eller's lab that if the mom's taking creatine during the third trimester, the baby has more creatine, even in preemies. The preemies do better with the creatine once they're born. And then the problem is they go to the formula and it drops off. And so that's where they're thinking they need to have about, 10
I see like 4 different new like product format revenue streams that you can create just from. You can do a prenatal, for women. You could do
Postnatal.
Postnatal. You could do formula for kids. You could do gummies for kids, like even like after infancy, after on formula. Then there is like the milk thing that we're talking about in the functional foods, and potential yogurts and stuff like that. There's just so many more formats that it can be in that doesn't directly relate to muscle building at all.
And Serge Ostajic also did a paper showing the adequate intake for infants, which is like about 8 milligrams per day. So even in the infant, there's a need for creatine. Adequate intake is just the minimum, right? And that might be underestimated. So that's where we're thinking it's at least in the infant about 10 milligrams, and then 10 milligrams per kg as they grow.
That's amazing.
But that, the problem with getting in the formula is that it's very difficult. You have to have a lot of safety data.
A lot more regulations.
A lot more regulations. So that will take time, but in the meantime, people can, look at the literature and decide if they want to add it to their diet.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you want to plug before we wrap up?
No plugs. We have a lot of...
What about creatineforhealth.com?
Oh, of course. That's the best source for accurate information on creatine.
Yeah.
We developed that to get the information out from our 2022 conference. We have YouTubes that have been looked at 5.5 million times.
Yeah.
Which is creatine in aging, creatine in pregnancy, there's all the different topics. And then we're going to be coming out with the 25 version. And so we'll be starting rolling out each of the main presentations on YouTube. There's a Creatine for Health YouTube channel. And you'll see all the papers as they're being published. It's going to be published in a special issue for the Journal of the International Society of Sport Nutrition.
That's super clever.
Yeah, and so we have the videos, we have the lectures, we have the articles. And so the idea is that the healthcare professional, the parent, the average person, it's written so they can also understand. And then we also have late articles that are kind of for blogs and things that basically describe it and summarize it. So we're trying to saturate the literature with accurate information about creatine so that when AI and all this starts pulling it up, they're pulling up our papers.
So far, it's working.
It seems to be working. I might have to add that to our paper, that AI's seem to be picking up the good information. So that's rewarding. And our ultimate goal is to let people know this is important, and they ought to be increasing their creatine in their diet, whether it comes from food or supplements.
I'm glad we got this out there because a lot of this information needs to be out there with all these different state laws coming up. But I definitely appreciate you for coming down here and entertaining us on our podcast here.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Enjoyed it.
All right.
Yeah. I got nothing.
All right. We'll see you next time. Supp Works Podcast.